I'm totally aware that someone can take our podcast right now and probably cherry pick comments and clip it out of context. At the same time, though, it's important when these things happen to capture that nuance and to be accurate about how these people are portrayed. If you are someone who doesn't pay attention to this information landscape, you would probably walk away with from a lot of the coverage with a incorrect understanding, I'd say, of who Charlie Kirk was.
Welcome to Power Lines, presented by Beehive. I'm John Passantino.
And I'm Oliver Darcy.
Today we're discussing the shocking murder of Charlie Kirk, who he was, and the reaction from the press and his MAGA media allies to this horrible act of violence. Before we get started, it should have to be said, but this is a disgusting and terrible moment that we're going through right now. There's no reason that we should ever be seeing people going out and committing violent acts against those for expressing their views and for speaking what they believe. And we are taping this on September 11th itself, a really grim and tragic day. And here we are talking about another horrible violent act. And this is a really difficult one. Oliver, we were working yesterday when this terrible event occurred, and both of us, I recall, reacted in just absolute shock that this could possibly be happening.
Yeah, I mean, it is shocking. I mean, I feel like I'm still trying to process this, and I couldn't believe it at first. I think that was probably a natural reaction amongst a lot of people. But it is utterly shocking. And obviously Charlie Kirk had a lot of fans and a lot of critics, and he was a polarizing figure in this country, but nothing excuses any sort of violence. Nevertheless, a really heinous act like this. And I think it's obviously larger than Kirk. It gets to who we are as Americans. And an attack like that is really an attack on who we are as a people. And are we allowed to argue and advocate for whatever in this country? I mean, that's what's always made America great, is you can have whatever view and you can go outside and you can say it because that is protected by the First Amendment. That is a foundational principle of this country. And to see anyone attacked for that is abhorrent and unacceptable. And I think that should be the really, that at least seems to be something, even in this polarized moment, that we can all agree on, broadly speaking, that this was intolerable and should never happen.
We are taping this roughly 24 hours after the shooting. There is still not a suspect that has been identified or taken into custody. We don't know the motivations. To an extent, they almost don't matter. The result is still the same. This horrible taking of life. Charlie Kirk was only 31 years old. The immediate reaction, though, I think, besides the shock and the horror of this moment, this sort of like hard to believe that this is happening, let alone captured on video for all to quickly consume. For the most part, the reaction was really swift condemnation from those in the mainstream press, from many of our leaders, that this is totally unacceptable. We saw a number of high-profile journalists and media commentators really condemn this sort of turn into political violence, regardless of where they sit on the political spectrum. And I think that was a very important thing to be said right now, which is that, if many are going to portray this as, a left on right attack, it's really important right now to hear those in that space say that this is completely unacceptable. We can never see this. We saw governors from states that had nothing to do with this come out and say, this has to stop. We can't live like this. and anchors, Mehdi Hassan being one of them, come out and say, I disagreed with Charlie Kirk on a lot of issues, right? I'd be shocked if there was anything they actually saw eye to eye on, but swiftly come out and say, but this can never happen. We cannot do this to each other.
Yeah, and it was more, it's not like Mehdi you just disagreed with Charlie Kirk, right? They clashed quite a bit. I actually wrote his quote down. He said on social media yesterday, Mehdi said, he wrote, "Charlie Kirk called me a lunatic and a prostitute and demanded I be deported. Nothing justifies killing him or robbing his kids of their dad. We don't know the identity or motive of the shooter, but murder can never be the response to political disagreements." And I think that was really a model almost on how people should respond to something like this. I think that on social media, which always brings out the worst of us, there were, a number of inappropriate and unacceptable comments. But what you saw from Mehdi was really, I think, what people with large platforms and who are progressive media stars, how they responded. And same with the news media figures, journalists. This isn't a left or right issue, right? Everyone is biased against political violence. And so you saw them yesterday very forthrightly say, this cannot happen and this is unacceptable, and call it for what it is. This is a horrific, heinous act of violence that is meant to chill speech in this country. And that's just simply not who we are as Americans. We are a country that tolerates and celebrates the fact that you can say what you think, and that is okay. And now we've had discussions on the show about like how social media platforms, whether there are rules on those for, what can be said and what should maybe not be allowed to be said. But he was on a college campus, right? And that's typically where views of all sorts are proclaimed and debated. And the fact that this would occur on a college campus, it was a sunny day, thousands of students had come out to see this event, and that someone would end it and end his life like this and rob his kids of their father is just beyond the pale. I don't think we have the words to describe this.
Yeah, and yet the unfortunate reality is that this event occurred in 2025, where it immediately becomes this online fodder. It becomes part of the already fractured and hyper-partisan environment.
And increasingly violent environment, right? There was the Paul Pelosi attack not too long ago, where a madman went and harmed him. There was obviously the attempt on Donald Trump's life that we all saw last summer. There was the shooting by of the United Healthcare CEO in New York City. There was the person who set fire to Governor Josh Shapiro's residence and was later charged with attempted murder. There were the really grim assassinations in Minnesota of Democratic officials. And now this. And it is, becoming disturbing how regular these acts of political violence are becoming in this country. We've been growing numb to, I think, gun violence in general and mass shootings. And it almost feels like we're reaching the point where these unacceptable crimes are becoming regular.
Yeah, certainly gun violence has become normalized, right? How many school shootings have we covered? In fact, yesterday, while we were reporting on this situation, and Charlie Kirk's, whether he would survive or not yesterday was still unknown for, at least a few hours. And at the same time, reports were coming in of a school shooting in Colorado, the next state over. And I think that it just speaks to, no, not the school shooting where Charlie Kirk was involved, the other school shooting where high school kids were being shot. I think really just speaks to how normalized this violence and gun violence specifically has become. And but at the same time, it is hard to ignore that immediately after the shooting, the blame game launched. And those on the right, those who were identify as friends or allies of Charlie Kirk, who believed strongly in his message, the MAGA media agenda in general, who really adhered to Donald Trump's ideology, immediately came out and pointed the finger at the left. We saw a whole host of people, Elon Musk, who obviously owns the X platform, where many people were consuming information about this, atrocity, saying that the left is evil and the party of murder, really intentionally stirring this up. Really sort of doing the opposite. Laura Loomer declared that the left are terrorists. Donald Trump then released a statement last night blaming this on the radical left, saying that they have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric, he said, is directly responsible for the terrorism that we are seeing in the country today. This isn't, since we're here on 9/11 recording this episode, this isn't one of those moments where the country from its top leadership is coming together to turn the temperature down. It is one where we are seeing really immediately a pointing of the finger at others within the country, even right now, as we know nothing about who did this, why they did it, what their connection, if anything, is to Kirk. And I think that is really telling, that the hatred that has been stirred up among many people right now. I worry that we're not seeing that kind of that sort of turning things down a notch after a person was just killed.
Yeah, well, you are on the left, right? I mean, I think on the left and in mainstream media, that's exactly what you're saying. And that's the responsible thing to do. And it stands in contrast to what you're saying is happening in MAGA media and right-wing media, which, importantly, this moment should be turning the temperature down. They should be saying cooler heads need to prevail here. This is unacceptable. They should link arms. Someone should link arms with Mehdi Hassan. Instead of Jesse Waters going on air and saying they are at war with us, whether we want to accept it or not, they are at war with us, and what are we going to do about it? It would be almost nice if he linked arms with someone like Mehdi and said, you know what, we agree on nothing, right? Like, we don't even like each other personally, but we do agree on this one thing that unifies us as Americans, which is that you do not ever, ever commit political acts of violence in this country. That is something we fundamentally agree on. And this country might be polarized, it might be fractured, but we cannot lose sight of that foundational principle. Unfortunately, that's, maybe in a yesteryear, that sort of bipartisanship or that sort of display of solidarity would have happened across the political spectrum, but you're not seeing that right now. Instead, you're seeing a lot of people with a lot of large audiences who have political power, like Laura Loomer has Donald Trump's ear, and she's calling for all sorts of things right now. You're seeing these people irresponsibly use their platforms, and they know it. I mean, I was watching Sean Hannity last night on the night of the shooting, and Clay Travis, the Outkick founder, was on, and he said, I want to read to you what he said, John, because he acknowledged that this would be the right thing to do, but then rejected doing it. He said, I am so angry, and I understand everybody out there says, well, we have to tamp down the anger. Then he goes on to say, I'm not willing to do that right now because I get angrier the more I think about this, Sean. They, no secret who they is in this sentence, put the wheels of motion for this in order. They did it, Sean. And the fact that, again, I mean, they know what they should be doing. They know what the right thing to do is here, and they're actively rejecting it. And instead, someone like Elon Musk, who commands a huge audience, tremendous political power, tremendous just power in general as a businessman, as a leader, they are stirring the pot, and they are raising the volume. They're turning it up. that's extremely worrisome, because if anything, right now, their voices matter more than ever, and they have the ability to do something good. And instead, you're seeing this.
Yeah, I think it feels like a bit of a breaking point here, where we have seen a continued fracturing of the media environment, people living in alternate timelines from one another, people who even live in the same household, people reading and consuming news from one place and the other. Charlie Kirk played a really key role in the delivery of this MAGA messaging, and the idea now that many of those who knew him or were close to him or who operate in that same echo chamber are now calling for vengeance, calling for blood, saying, you did this. Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, his wife, Katie Miller, who has her own podcast, said that, you called us Nazis, you called us racist, you have blood on your hands, directly calling out, quote, liberals for doing this. And that, again, what is the audience supposed to make of that when they hear it, right? Like, they're just supposed to get stirred up into even more anger. And it's horrifying to see that in Kirk's death, it just becomes more content chum for people to quote RT and put online with your angry reaction to go get them. They did this to us. And I think it is a symptom of this larger cancer in the media ecosystem in this country, where you are influencers with large followings are incentivized to say the craziest, most radical thing because it will get more views, more clicks, more engagement, and therefore, in the way that a lot of these platforms are geared, more dollars. And I think that is unfortunate. An actual human being's life was lost in this, regardless of how you feel about the words that he would say, the political views that he held. But it is where we are right now, and I think we should really hope and press that our political leadership will help to tamp that down, to push for cooler heads to prevail here.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath though, because that's just does not seem to be the overriding theme that we're seeing. And I also think, John, it's important to point out that when, the reaction you're seeing from people like Mehdi on the left stands in such contrast to how the right has repeatedly responded in the wake of political violence. I just go back to when Paul Pelosi was attacked, and there were all sorts of conspiracy theories being fueled by people like Elon Musk. Remember that? He was fueling these conspiracy theories. In the wake of these tragic incidences, these two different media universes respond dramatically differently. And it's important to point out, particularly because there is a lot of anti-media sentiments being whipped up right now. That was actually an overriding theme of Sean Hannity's program, his 2-hour special program, the night that Kirk was murdered. He was playing clips of out of context clips of people in the media, frankly, just describing that Kirk was polarizing, which shouldn't be controversial. I think, he would probably acknowledge himself he was polarizing, and saying that the media was whipping up basically violent sentiments in this country. Sean Hannity knew exactly what he was doing. And instead of him playing, again, clips of people on the left and in mainstream media condemning this, that's what he chose to do. And they're stirring up an anti-media sentiment. So I think it's very important to point out that the vast majority of people in the media and the press and progressive media have condemned this. And that stands in firm contrast to how, frankly, Fox News has responded in the wake of other attacks and how these right-wing media personalities have responded before.
Let's continue this. When we come back, let's discuss those polarizing views that Charlie Kirk held and espoused on these campuses that turned him into a well-known media personality.
Before I tell you about this opportunity, let me share why I chose Beehive for the Status newsletter. From the beginning, I wanted Status to feel distinct, not like it was stamped out of a template. Beehive has allowed us to build a completely custom experience. The design of the website, the way the newsletter looks in your inbox, and so much more. Most platforms force you into a cookie-cutter format, but Beehive gave us creative control to match the polish of the reporting itself. That was the deciding factor for me. Not just technology, but the ability to truly own how the publication looks and feels. Since switching to Beehive, I've experienced firsthand why so many others have made the same choice. It's the difference between using a generic tool and using something purpose-built for serious media operations. Which brings me to why I'm excited to share this opportunity with fellow media operators who are ready to take their publications to the next level. If you're running a media business with over 100,000 subscribers, Beehive wants to offer you something valuable, a free growth consultation to explore how switching platforms could unlock your publication's next level. It's not a sales call, it's a conversation with Beehive's team of veterans from top-tier media companies like The Information, Puck, Airmail, Morning Brew, and BuzzFeed to understand the unique challenges you're facing at scale, from subscriber retention and monetization to content distribution and audience segmentation. They'll work on ways to improve the success of your operation. If you're hitting the ceiling with your current platform or wondering how to optimize for the next 100,000 subscribers, this growth consultation could be exactly what you need. Visit beehive.com/status to book your call. That's beehive.com/status.
Welcome back. Oliver, we're talking about the death of Charlie Kirk, this horrifying and still shocking event that occurred. Charlie was an interesting person. He was started at a very young age as a teenager as a campus organizer for Republican causes with his Turning Point USA that he founded. And he quickly found an audience for it. He was very effective at spreading a conservative message pre-Donald Trump, right? This extends before it. It was one that resonated really strongly on college campuses, and his message, well, his really unique way of going in as a conservative, as a contrarian, and confronting on camera, quote unquote, liberal college students and provoking debate and conversation among them, and then packaging those moments as videos to post on the internet that would go viral, where he's, taking down liberal talking points, showing students that don't even know why they believe what they believe, and really sort of like bringing the debate and confrontation to these campuses. And he would quickly became seen as somebody who was engaging in a group of people that, for the most part, politicians kind of have really had a difficult time speaking to, right? I mean, most politicians, especially presidential candidates, as we well know in this country, are very old and do not know how to talk to the youngs. They don't speak their language. They just have no clue. And here you have like 18-year-old Charlie Kirk, who decides and feels very compelled to speak to this group of people from his own, from his deep-seated views that, conservatism can be something that is animating and exciting for young people. It just has to be packaged correctly. And we have to just challenge people's views. And that quickly took off, right? And Charlie not only saw a lot of success with Turning Point USA, but also then was handed radio shows. He was on the Salem Radio Network, which has affiliates across the country. He had a program on Real America's Voice. This is the pseudo cable TV channel that's basically an online streaming platform that's farther to the right of Fox News. And we see really a huge number of people, millions of people who follow him on social media platforms. So he had this trajectory of coming from pure partisanship, unabashed. I am here from the right to challenge you libs. And Donald Trump, with his most recent election, especially in 2024, owes his victory in some sense to the work that Charlie Kirk did at convincing young people, at convincing influencers that this message that triggers the libs can be one that resonates. And it does very well on social media and on college campuses. And he amassed a huge following. At this rally that he was holding on the Utah campus this week where he was shot, there were, according to law enforcement, 3,000 people who attended it, right? And if anything, he relished in the backlash to it when protesters would show up. That was part of the shtick, was to try to convince me that I'm wrong. Tell me that I'm wrong. And one of the things that I think he was very effective at was encouraging a dialogue, even if it was a sort of combative dialogue and a debate that he would held and package and post online. One of the things that he did is he would go directly into these places that were seemed as bastions of the left and want to hold these dialogues. And the horrifying thing is that is where he was shot this week.
Yeah, I think he was one of the first people to really understand, frankly, in conservative politics, how to use the internet, right? How to wield social media platforms in their favor. And so you saw him, and I think he understood that conflict was really what works on social media. And so he would create that conflict by having these tents set up on campuses where he would sit there and go back and forth with liberals, with critics, with his detractors. And that really catapulted him into digital stardom. I mean, when he was first organizing, I think, on college campuses, he was not some MAGA media star. He was actually, I think, skeptical of the MAGA movement when it first was taking hold in this country. He was a typical conservative activist, organizing college students the old-fashioned way, if you will, right? Doing a lot of tabling and things of that nature. And at some point, I think, and you saw this to some extent with Ben Shapiro, he also tours campuses and gets into these back and forths. But it becomes very clear that on social media, particularly as short form video does really well on platforms like TikTok or Instagram, that these moments of debate, they do well. They perform very well on social media. People watch them. And so he embraced it. And he would go to these campuses and people would yell at him, but it would actually make him stronger, right? Because that's what he wanted. He wanted that conflict, and they would post it on social media and it would get millions and millions of views. And so he ended up becoming a star by really understanding, I think, how these platforms unfortunately work today, which is that divisiveness and conflict and debate in the most spirited terms that really doesn't, I would argue, accomplish much. It's not like really aimed at convincing the other side that they're wrong, but more of scoring political points on them by seeing who can, have the most sick burns or dunk on someone the harder. That was sort of what made these videos do really well. And both, I hate to say both sides do this sort of thing and really walked away from those interactions more popular because they both got views and they both got to show their audiences that they go toe to toe and they hold the other side accountable, I guess. I don't know.
Those videos that he would post and that others within his organization, they would go viral because it would show him as the victor in these, that his arguments were the right ones, and that he would lay bare that liberals or those on the left had no idea what they were talking about and couldn't actually defend their own views. They had been brainwashed, right? And we heard Kirk and others regularly use this, that you've been told by the media, you've been told by Hollywood, you've been told by all of these people, your parents, your teachers, your universities. They've been brainwashing you into believing these things. And I'm here to counter that and to expose that you actually can't even defend it, that you actually don't know what you're talking about. And that played extremely well to the online right base and earned him instant credibility and camaraderie among them. And we saw Donald Trump really embrace him, especially with his with his reelection. But Kirk would intentionally use really divisive culture war topics for these discussions. It wasn't about, let's say, whether or not like we need to do more about the debt in the United States, which used to be something that like conservatives were very worried about. It would be issues now like transgender individuals, whether or not they should even have rights in this country. He vigorously attacked trans people, talked about that they were, not normal or unwell. He spread lies about the 2020 election that Donald Trump lost and was a key voice on the right who inflamed the view that Joe Biden unfairly won, that the election was stolen, and was part of the Stop the Steal. And that was a key motivating force on the right. Conservatives, Republicans, Trump adherents did not just wake up one day and believe the election was stolen. They had to be told this and constantly reinforced it. And you see Trump still to this day continue to pose and lie that he had allegedly won in 2020. Kirk also said that, regularly would slam immigrants and say that they are not a core part of what this country is and what they stand for. He called Martin Luther King Jr. a bad guy and said that the civil rights movement or law, the act, was a mistake. He said that Joe Biden should be in Gitmo because he's a traitor to this country. Those are his words. And he said that Joe Biden should be put in prison or given the death penalty for crimes against America. His words. The place that Charlie Kirk, I think, once occupied 10 years ago is a very different one than where Charlie Kirk occupied in the last months of his life, where these more extreme positions, these more pointed positions, calling for, effectively the death of Joe Biden. And this is being broadcast, and we have covered this, Oliver, in the status newsletter, calling for violence, or in this case, the arrest, fomenting that kind of, that kind of commentary that angers a base and stirs them up into, a point of wanting to take action is one that Kirk ended up in. And I think it is very telling as to what you said, where value is created on social media platforms and how you continue to grow your audience on these places.
And I think it's unfortunate, John, as we talk about this, and it's a difficult discussion because obviously, again, no violence is acceptable in this country. No political violence is acceptable, regardless of how extreme your views are. And as you well documented there, he was voicing very extremist opinions on his platforms. And I've actually been reading the mainstream news coverage of who he was, and unfortunately, there's just really not an honest accounting there of who he was. He's a lot of his words are actually being sanitized. A lot of who he was is being sanitized, and he's being portrayed, I think, as someone who, was a thought leader who was engaging in the good faith debate. I think there's an Ezra Klein column. I want to be accurate by pointing this out. What did it say? It said, the headline is, Charlie Kirk was practicing politics the right way. And again, no political violence is ever tolerable in this country. It's unacceptable. But saying that the sitting president should be sent to Gitmo or given the death penalty. I wouldn't say that's practicing politics the right way. I don't see how you can come to that conclusion. And so when you're reading, and that's Ezra Klein in the New York Times, when you're reading some of the coverage of him today, it's a little bit strange because, we've followed Charlie Kirk for a while. We've covered him. I remember when Charlie Kirk emerged on the scene a decade ago, I think, I was working in conservative politics and media myself. The idea that, in recent years, he's been practicing politics the best way, I don't know. I mean, maybe Ezra Klein is unaware of who Charlie Kirk was and what he was saying on his shows, but it's not accurate. And it's unfortunate because even when there is a death, there should be accurate press coverage of who they were. There should be an honest accounting of who he was, and not really a sanitizing of the record. When anyone dies, it's always very difficult in the immediate wake to discuss these things. But I think good news coverage captures the nuance the best it can. And I just don't think we're seeing that right now. And it probably has to do with the horrible political environment that we're currently in as a country, and the intimidation tactics coming from people like Donald Trump and his lieutenants in government. But it's important to talk about these things.
I do agree. I think many in the press right now are very carefully choosing their words. And I think that they are sidestepping much of what Kirk advocated for, especially in his later years, and what he contributed to in terms of the atmosphere, especially the environment in which conservatives or Republicans or Trump supporters consume their information. I don't even want to call it news. These are not news platforms. These are commentary platforms. And generally speaking, the topic du jour every day on these platforms was that the left is violent. They are a hateful group of people. They are destroying our country. They are evil, demonic forces. I mean, you hear this language all the time. And I feel like in some cases, like we are broken records because we cover this every single day, but it can't be overstated just how important it is to understand what these people are saying and telling millions of Americans every single day. And you hear that repeatedly, you hear that enough, and it's normalized, and you start to believe it. It becomes second nature to you. And Kirk was part of that overall, right-wing atmosphere. And I think it is very difficult for mainstream press in this moment to try to say that this was a despicable and horrible act that should never happen. But at the same time, here is what this person who we're talking about, here's what they advocated for. Here is what they did. And here is, where his supporters or his allies are. And we're seeing a ton of, lionizing of him now that he has died, and straight up declaring from the right that he was a martyr for their cause. I was surprised last night that we saw the Yankee Stadium Jumbotron light up in memorial for him. I'm not quite sure what connection he had to, a baseball team, but he's been getting a lot of frankly, a lot of just mainstream coverage that suggests that he was an individual who was just out there, a family man and speaking, and that is true. But at the same time, I think misses a lot of what he contributed to. And
misses the nuance of who he was, and good obituaries and good coverage captures that. And I get it. Look, John, I get it. I understand why there's this fearful climate. I'm totally aware that someone can take our podcast right now and probably cherry pick comments and clip it out of context. And that's a fear that is very much felt in mainstream newsrooms, that, one comment can be used by people like Sean Hannity, like he was doing last night, to attack the network, to destroy credibility, and to stir up, a lot of unwanted feeling toward that network. And so I get it. At the same time, though, it's important when these things happen to capture that nuance and to be accurate about how these people are portrayed. And I don't think that's coming through in a lot of the coverage right now. And if you don't know who Charlie Kirk was, I think about this a lot because, again, we're in this space. We're watching his show quite frequently. We know who he was. We read his tweets and all that. But if you are someone who doesn't pay attention to this information landscape in the same way, you would probably walk away with from a lot of the coverage with a incorrect understanding, I'd say, of who Charlie Kirk was.
Yeah, I think we are largely in a atmosphere of fear in recent months, and I think this lands at a moment that, in some ways, also contributes to it. That it is difficult for many to speak clearly and plainly in this moment because there is so much at stake, and there is so much that people are afraid of might happen. Both that led to a moment like this, that this represents, and also what might still be to come down the road.
I also think, John, can I also say this too? I think it's very important to point out that accurate news coverage of people like Donald Trump or people like Charlie Kirk is not the same thing as others spreading conspiracy theories and whipping up hate based on misinformation against the left or the mainstream press or whatever. Those are very different things. So when the press accurately describes what Donald Trump is doing in the Oval Office and points out, the disturbing actions that he is taking, that is completely different than Alex Jones or Tucker Carlson going on air and spreading lies and demonizing politicians on the left, people like Joe Biden. And I think that's also important and needs to be said. It is okay to accurately describe who people are and what they're doing. That is not the same thing as we've seen from other organizations and people, and mainly in MAGA media. They spread lies and misinformation often, and that's frankly a lot of times how they're catapulted to stardom. And so the attacks right now on news organizations, for last night, I think Sean Hannity seized on a comment where I believe it was Katie Tur at MSNBC described Kirk as polarizing. That is an accurate comment. And that is totally different than what Sean Hannity does on an effectively hourly basis, but certainly a daily basis.
All right. Well, when we come back, we're going to discuss how the social media platforms, where Charlie Kirk's shooting, where his death largely played out on Wednesday, are part of this entire atmosphere. Welcome back. So, Oliver, the death of Charlie Kirk really landed like almost every major news cycle these days on social media, where users of platforms, but I think most specifically on Elon Musk's X yesterday, who opened the app, were immediately greeted with this frankly horrific video in which Kirk is shot. A bullet very clearly pierces his neck, and depending on which version you saw, blood is immediately, drips out, gushes out, and you see him sort of fall back into the side. I'm almost at a loss of words at how horrifying it was to watch that unexpectedly, without intent, not knowing. And we saw many others recoil, even offering instructions. Here's how to turn off autoplay. But these videos weren't always coming from like a person you were already following. They were just being thrust into your timeline from people you've never followed and immediately just autoplays this graphic footage. And it was really, quite frankly, a terrible moment for everybody to log on. And I think most people are not looking for that. They want to at least expressly consent to wanting to watch this horrifying footage. But we didn't get that yesterday. Instead, people were just immediately confronted with it. And I think the sort of sad reality is that Charlie Kirk's death, as someone who spent a lot of time in these online ecosystems and really took advantage of these algorithms to carry his message further, that in his death immediately, the same thing occurred where this footage of him suddenly went viral and people were, quote, retweeting it. I saw Senator Ted Cruz quote it and push it into his hundreds of thousands or millions of followers and beyond with his message. And I feel like there is a real lack of accountability and caution on these platforms where at any moment you might log in and, dear God, what horrific thing. And we saw the similar sort of event just a few days prior where a Ukrainian refugee woman was killed on a transit line in North Carolina by, what I believe was a homeless person or a mentally ill person. And it was just immediately thrust. And I think this sort of thing is just desensitizing people to this sort of violence. And I don't feel like we're headed in a good place here with that.
It's really horrific to see, for one. It's a video that you just can't get out of your head. And especially so when you have had it thrust on you multiple times while just logging on the internet, just logging on social media to see, what's going on, or you might not have even known about what was going on with Charlie Kirk when you logged on X, let's say, and you just see a very graphic, horrible video of someone dying, just autoplay within seconds. And there's nothing you can do. You don't even know what you're about to see. It just happens. And, you see blood just gush out of his throat and him fall over and die. And it is just horrific. And I worry a couple things. One, as you said, it desensitizes people over time to these very violent acts where it almost becomes, again, like normalized, where you see it so many times that it's just like, oh, and there's just another video of someone just being killed and murdered. Just gruesome. And then the other thing I worry about too is it, the copycats that people like, there's a reason that news organizations, there was a time, I don't know if this still happens, where people would attach GoPros as they were carrying out mass shootings, right? And there was a reason that news organizations did not run that footage, right? And it was scrubbed, at the time, I hope it would still be scrubbed, but from social media platforms like Meta, they would take it down pretty quickly because you don't want to glorify violence. You don't want to desensitize people to the violence. You don't want to expose people to that kind of violence. And you certainly don't want to leave a place where someone might want to copycat that violence. And by showing this video, and I do agree, it was primarily, I was on Blue Sky and not seeing this video. But I just logged on X, a day later, and I scrolled past it really fast, but it was going to autoplay for me again in the feed. I worry about it. I don't know. I think Elon Musk in particular has, at the very least, he's made the choice not to provide a warning or to, he's certainly not going to scrub the platform or the video. But, on Meta platforms, for instance, when there's a graphic video about to play in Instagram or wherever you are on Meta, there's usually it's usually blurred out, right? And it says like, this warning, this is a graphic video. And you can click if you want to. That's not happening on X. And it's almost like Elon wants everyone to see the video repeatedly.
Yeah, and when I was on other platforms yesterday as this occurred, I had a sort of similar experience. If I logged onto Blue Sky, if anything, I saw a lot of people saying, I regret that I saw the video. Don't watch the video. It's always very dependent on who you follow, given, which is why we're in such this fractured media environment. But the same thing on Instagram and others, I never saw the footage in any of those places. It does feel like an intentional decision to amplify these extreme moments that are getting lots of engagement and reaction in real time. That's an intentional decision to tune these algorithms to do that. And I think that this administration is quite beholden to the echo chamber of social media platforms, and specifically X. I think the thing that has really stunned myself and others is how Kash Patel, the FBI director that Donald Trump has appointed, has tried to immediately engage in this moment by providing tweet updates of the hunt for this killer. And not once, but twice yesterday, he posted that a subject had been taken into custody for this killing. You saw an outpouring of relief from people like Megyn Kelly and others. Thank you, Kash. Only for hours or even less than an hour later for him to walk that back and say, oh, actually, this wasn't the killer. And all that has done is contributed to this atmosphere online of uncertainty, a lack of trust in where information is going to come from. And that vacuum is being filled with more questions, more conspiracy theories as to who would be behind this. And if anything, the only thing you know for certain is this horrific video that's being served to you. And we've seen this administration in particular really beholden to those on the far right, on social media platforms. The Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy theories in particular come to mind. And the DOJ and Trump have come under extreme pressure from their own group of followers, their own base over this on social media. And you see them in this very uncomfortable position. And now we have Charlie Kirk, a leader who's being lionized as a member of the right, of the MAGA movement, and friends and family member of them. And now he is dead. And there are demands for his killer to be brought to justice. And you see this sort of befuddled, false hope put out there by the head of Trump's FBI that, like, we got him. And only for minutes later to say, oh, actually, sorry about that. And that desire to be in the real-time conversation, I think has not been beneficial at all.
I agree. I actually think sometimes the best thing to do is just to log off if you can, and then read the newspaper, at the end of the day or the next day, because there will be generally an accounting of what actually happened. The misinformation will have been debunked, and you'll get, you'll understand the story actually a lot better than if you were exposed to a lot of the misinformation that swirls around. I also think, John, on the topic of the violent videos, this should be another area where, regardless of where you fall in this political spectrum, we should just not want people to log on platforms and see people being murdered, right? That should be that should be a through line across the political spectrum. And one would hope that, that there would be some accountability here for, particularly for Elon, I guess, because it was really an Elon Musk issue. I don't think it was a Meta issue. I'm not scrolling through Reels and seeing the video. But there should be some accountability for this and some questions at the very least about how Elon has run that platform and exposed people to these violent videos. There used to be these fringe sites. What were they called? Where they would show. You could go and see violent videos, and people stayed away from them for the most part because they don't want to see that. And they have the technology. It's not like Elon Musk does not have the technology to put a warning label over the video before people click on it. So you would have to actively choose to opt into watching that video. It's not like he can't say that we're going to take this off the home feed or make it so that if you don't follow someone, it's not injected into your home feed. There are a lot of things that Elon Musk could do in this case to reduce the spread of a very disturbing scene. Instead, he's tweeting that the left is the party of murder and ratcheting up the volume. And it makes me wonder whether he just wants people to actually see this particular video. It's disturbing.
All right. Well, it's been a very disturbing week in media and politics with this event. All we can do in this moment is hope for and encourage for cooler heads to prevail. We hope to see an end to this as soon as possible, and a return to a time where people can respect one another's viewpoints and not view one another as the enemy, and really a proper close to this horrible chapter that we are going through right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that's where everything's headed, but one can still hold out hope, and maybe this will be a moment where collectively the country can turn the page and reject violence and say this is not who we are.
Well, that's it for us this week. Thanks for listening to Power Lines. Oliver, I'll catch you next week.
See you, John.
Thank you for listening to Power Lines, a presentation of Status, and a special thank you to Beehive for sponsoring this episode. The show is produced by Matt Hevia and Antonio Enriquez in association with In the Arena Studios. Please like, share, and subscribe to Power Lines on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen, and watch full episodes and clips on our YouTube page at Status.